The first and indispensable requisite of happiness is a clear conscience. Happiness consists in having what you want and wanting what you have.
I stop worrying about stupid things so much. One of the things that Zen is always reminding you that, life is short, you're going to die. And so do you really want to be worrying about, whether your neighbor has a large or big screen TV?
Hi, this is Dr. Ned Hallowell. Welcome to Distraction. On today's show, we're going to be talking about happiness. How often do you think about it? Is it important to you? Of course it's important to you. We're going to explore some of these ideas today. Happiness is big business in the United States, as you'll hear a little bit later. Take podcasts, for example. When producers check today, the number one show in the health category on Apple Podcasts is the Happiness Podcast. And Happier with Gretchen Rubin has topped the charts for over 2 years. I certainly think a lot about happiness myself, and I'll bet you do too. I think sometimes we can overdo talking about happy, as if it were a goal in and of itself. I think at its best, happiness is a byproduct. And in my own case, it's usually a byproduct of some sort of connection. To a friend, to a project like writing a book or tending a garden, or petting my dog, So I think happiness as a goal can be kind of specious. But as a byproduct of passionate connection or involvement in life, that's, I think, the best happiness you get. Anyway, let's get started. Today, it's a real treat for me, and I mean that very personally, to have one of the giants in psychiatry, and that's no exaggeration. Robert Waldinger is a professor at Harvard Medical School, a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, a Zen priest. He is the director of the longest ongoing longitudinal study ever done, called the Grant Study, and I think it's now called the Harvard Study of Adult Development, and tracked the lives of 724 men. But mostly, Bob Waldinger is simply a wise and seasoned psychiatrist who's seen it all and remains active, teaching, seeing patients, is a down-to-earth, real human being, one of those rare people in our field, and just a enthusiastic, tremendously knowledgeable, but also humble giant in the field of psychiatry. So it is indeed an honor, a treat, and a privilege to welcome Bob Waldinger to Distraction. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for that introduction.
Well,
I wish I could tape record it and then play it back periodically on my bad days.
It is the God's honest truth, that's for sure. So tell us the study. This is truly, as happiness has become a hot topic, and most people don't realize that that this study is the grandfather of them all. So fill our listeners in. What is it?
Well, the study started in the late 1930s, and it actually started as two studies. One of a group of Harvard College undergrads, and one a study of inner-city Boston boys. The Harvard College undergrads was a study of how people develop normally from adolescence into young adulthood. And the inner-city study of the Boston boys was a study of why some kids raised in very disadvantaged homes still managed to grow up okay and not get in trouble with the law, while other kids raised in similar homes get in trouble with the law. So it was really a study of juvenile delinquency. Mm-hmm. And we've followed both of those groups now for 78 years.
That's amazing. 78 years. So the study began in the 1930s,
mm-hmm.
and it was Harvard undergrads and some poor other kids. By the way, if you hear noise in the background, Bob is in a building where there's some construction going on, and I thought it's sort of appropriate, a show called Distraction, we have a built-in distraction. So if you do hear noise, that's what's happening, and we'll just work around it. But In any case, I was just saying the two patient populations are Harvard undergraduates and inner city youth?
Yes.
Okay. And you say followed. What does that mean? What did you do?
Well, it means that every couple of years we sent them a questionnaire about their lives, about their home lives, their health, their mental health, their work lives. And then we also interviewed them about every 10 years. Somebody went to their homes and talked to them. We got their medical records from their doctors with their permission every 5 years. And lately we've drawn their blood for DNA, and some of them we scanned their brains. Wow. And so you would have ongoing data in great detail on all of them. It's a lot of work. It's an enormous amount of work. And we have these enormous file cabinets filled with tens of thousands of pages of information on these men.
Wow. Now, George Valiant was the lead investigator for the longest while, right?
Yes, he was the third director.
Wow.
Not the fourth director.
Okay. Well, so for our listeners, what are the salient findings? What do you know about happiness?
Well, we know some basic things that won't be any surprise to any of the listeners here, which is that taking care of yourself physically is really important, that the people who got addicted to smoking, the people who got in trouble with alcohol, had much less happy, healthy lives and they died earlier. And the people who exercised regularly lived longer. The inner city men died on average 10 years earlier than the Harvard men.
Wow.
But there were 25 inner city men who actually went to college and finished college, and those men lived just as long as the Harvard men.
So is going to college a protective factor?
Well, it's not the diploma, probably. It's probably all the conditions that supported you enough to get to college, and then the personal qualities that allowed you to stay in college and finish it, that all of those probably contribute to taking better care of yourself later on in your life and living longer.
I remember George being quoted as saying, asked to sum it all up, and he said the key to happiness is love, full stop.
Yes, and that's George's way of talking about what we kept finding and still find, which is that relationships, that being connected to other people is one of the very small number of vital factors in what keeps people happy and also what keeps them physically healthy. And the interesting thing for us was not just that having good relationships kept you happier, that kind of makes sense, but why should it keep you from getting heart disease as early? Why should it keep you from getting arthritis or diabetes? And we're beginning to understand more and more about that, and other research studies are too.
Well, do you know the current Surgeon General of the United States, Tom Friedman, for his new book, asked him, what is the number one health problem in the country today? Number one health problem in the United States today, 2017. And it's not heart disease. It's not obesity. It's not cancer. It's not depression. The number one health problem, according to our Surgeon General, is isolation.
It's so interesting because this morning I got an email from his office asking if I would meet with him. And
wonderful.
I think it must be about this.
Yes.
I literally just saw this email an hour ago.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. And it's such a hidden epidemic because we're all connected like never before in human history electronically, but interpersonally we're disconnecting.
Right. Yeah. And the really important variable, I think, seems to be loneliness, right? So
yes.
You can be lonely in a crowd and you can be lonely anywhere.
Yes.
So it's that subjective experience of not being as connected to people as you want to be.
Right. You can be a shy, happy introvert.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but lonely, that's not good.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we're beginning, so our current study, we're studying all the children of these men, right? Almost all the men have died. And the ones who are still living are in their 90s. But we're studying their children who are all baby boomers.
Oh, wonderful.
And a lot of what we're studying is, what is it? How do relationships get under the skin, into the body?
Yes.
and either keep us healthy or break our health down.
Yes, yes. I call it the other vitamin C, Vitamin Connect.
Yeah.
And I think we're living in a massive vitamin C deficiency, that the beauty of vitamin C is it's free and infinite in supply. The sad thing is people don't take it seriously enough. But with folks like you and the Surgeon General, maybe that'll change.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, because there are, it's the kind of thing you can make choices about every day.
Yes. And you're here to tell us that making those choices not only will make you happier, but make you live longer.
Yeah, that it's really a form of self-care.
So talking to the person who checks you out at the supermarket.
Yeah, and making sure you check in with that friend who you haven't seen in a while.
Yes, yes.
And taking time to talk with your partner.
Yes.
Because often, people who live together are like ships passing in the night.
Absolutely.
Family dinners. There's all this research now.
Oh, huge.
That shows that there are tremendous benefits to family dinners.
It raises SAT scores. I mean,
yeah.
it sounds unrelated, but that's not true at all. I mean,
right.
Well, you mentioned love and connection being one of the very few factors. What are the others?
One of the things we're interested in is a sense of purpose and meaning in life. We find that people really need to feel like they matter somehow to somebody. And that's different. From being famous, it's different from being important.
Right.
It's really are there people who care about whether I show up each day? Yeah. And so we're trying to understand more about that.
So feeling that what you do matters.
Yeah. And that's particularly an issue for people who retire. And the government is interested in this because there are a lot of people who retire and then they go home and all their wisdom and expertise gets tucked away and they sit on the couch and they're trying to figure out what motivates people to stay engaged in their communities. Because it's such a loss if they don't. And one of the things you hear from people, from retirees, is that in many situations they try to volunteer and they don't feel like anyone notices that they're there, or they feel like if they didn't come in the next day, no one would pay attention. So there is this sense of, do I still matter?
And who are the happiest people in retirement?
Well, we did some work on that. Actually, George Valiant did, and he found that people who are happiest replace their workmates with new playmates. And this is particularly men who forget that the people they see at the office are actually a big part of their social life. And suddenly they're shocked when they go home and realize they're not seeing anybody. So the people who actively found clubs and golf buddies and other ways to connect with people on a regular basis, those are the people who are happier. Could be grandchildren, and also people who kept learning things. That seemed to be really important. And people who found ways to play and do creative things. Yes.
I have a squash game on Tuesday afternoons that I've been playing with my friend Peter Metz for 35 years. I'll see him tomorrow. And I really do think that's one of the keys to my physical and mental health. So you would support that?
Absolutely, keep because not only is it play, but you're connecting with your friend every week on a regular basis.
And we go out for a beer after the game, and talk about everything under the sun.
Yeah.
People let friendships go, don't they?
They do, and they don't mean to. They sort of die of attrition. It's not because usually it's not because anybody's mad or wants to let the friendship go. They just forget to do it. And so often these structured things, like you're describing, a weekly squash game, a weekly lunch.
How about spirituality? Like I also go to church every Sunday. Is that a factor at all?
It is for some people. Some people don't find that much help in spirituality. Other people find it a tremendous help. So I think it varies a lot. One thing that spirituality does is it makes you feel like you belong to something.
Right.
And so some people use it for spiritual comfort. Some people use it to create community. And then some people find other ways to fill those needs. I mean, for me, it's being a Zen practitioner has been an enormous help in my life.
How does it help?
Well, I stop worrying about stupid things so much. One of the things that Zen is always reminding you that life is short. You're going to die. And so do you really want to be worrying about, whether your neighbor has a large or big screen TV?
Right. It seems that Zen is more popular now than ever. It seems to be catching on,
Well, mindfulness certainly is.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. It's become the kind of, some people have talked about it as McMindfulness, like it becomes this kind of commodity. So, but it's a very helpful skill.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I do it. My form of it is praying, but however you do it, it's sort of bringing you into a different realm psychologically. How about a dog? That's one of my favorites. I think I prescribe dogs for all my patients.
Well, we know, now that dogs are hugely helpful. Physiologically, they're helpful. They calm people down. They allow for expression of emotions that otherwise get bottled up. I mean, it's great.
Good. Okay. So there's scientific backing for that as well.
There is. Now, obviously, there's some people, as we know, not everybody should have a dog because some people don't want to do that caretaking, but or aren't in a situation where they can. But boy, they're great.
Yeah. Do you have children?
Two.
And what about children? Any data that says having children is protective or not?
No. Actually, the data sort of says people aren't happier with or without children, that having children doesn't make a difference in your level of happiness. Mm-hmm. So it really is a very personal thing. Some people are quite happy not having children.
Yes.
Many people can't imagine their lives without children.
Yes.
I think it's like spirituality in that way. It's highly variable.
How about difficult events? If a person experienced a trauma or a divorce or a death of a loved one early on, does that predict anything, or is there any?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of work now on childhood adversity. I'm sure you know about the Adverse Childhood Events Study.
Yes, I do.
That started out of Kaiser on the West Coast.
Tell our listeners
Yeah,
quickly
so this was a study in which it was started by primary care doctors who noticed that people who had a lot of bad things happen to them in childhood had more chronic illnesses as adults. Mm-hmm. And so the bad things in childhood could be child abuse, it could be death of a parent, it could be family mental illness, domestic violence, lots of things. Mm-hmm. And that the larger the number of bad things that happened, the worse your health was as an adult. Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing we know is that can be buffered, that can be softened by good connections. Mm-hmm. Relationships help tremendously, including relationships at the time. So, if you were abused or victimized as a kid, if you have supportive people around and you tell people and you're believed and then they take steps to keep you safe, that's very different from being victimized as a kid and having nobody to tell and feeling chronically unsafe. So the environment in which things happen to you makes a big difference, and that's mostly the human connections you have, and good, warm connections can go a long way to mitigating that.
So once again, we see the transformative power of connection. That Adverse Childhood Events, they have a 10-point scale, and if you score 4 or higher, your outcome is statistically not going to be a good one.
Yeah.
My score is 8.
Really?
Yeah. And here I am, 67 years old with 3 wonderful children and 29 years of marriage and written 20 books, and I'm a happy man. So you would predict, would you not, that it was positive human connections along the way that made the difference?
Yeah.
And that's certainly what happened in my life. Again, I come back to George's remark, love, full stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, a lot of the research on child development shows that the strongest predictor of resilience, that means like doing well in spite of bad things, risk factors in your past, that the best predictor of resilience is having at least one stable adult who's just crazy about you.
Yes. As my old friend Priscilla Vale used to say, someone who gets a kick out of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is very important information for people to have because they can use it today. So would you prescribe a connected life for our listeners?
Well, I would prescribe the dose of connection that works for you.
Right,
So
right.
one thing I'm thinking about is this whole body of research on introversion versus extroversion.
Yeah.
Some people who are introverts don't need a lot of human connection.
Yes.
They need some.
Yes.
And other people just thrive on human connection and need more.
Right, and the last thing you want to do is make an introvert feel bad about being an introvert, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
or push introverts into social situations that they don't want to be in.
And just feel miserable, right?
Yeah.
You know, you should go be the life of the party, and then they stand
right.
there awkwardly, you know, feeling like they're a loser. But what is wonderful about your work, Bob, is that you're proving this. I mean, this is not just wise advice. You really have robust data to support it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing that's helpful for some people. Some people say, you know, this is what your minister would tell
right,
you, so
exactly.
what?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But to have data is convincing for some people.
Yes.
Other people would say, I could have told you that.
Yes, yes.
You know, so some people watch the TED Talk I gave about the importance of relationships and say, well, duh, you know, because it's not news to them.
Right. But it's nice to have duh proved, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
So we're proving duh.
Well, on that note, let me wish you really good luck with the Surgeon General. I think it's fantastic that, you know, this will begin to get some national exposure because it's such good news, really. Everyone can take this and use it and improve their lives and the lives of the people around them. And we're not just individuals, but groups, businesses, towns, institutions, all so applicable. And I'm proud to know you, Bob. You're doing amazing work, and I just send you my congratulations.
Well, I'm proud to know you too, Ned. It's nice to reconnect a little bit.
It really is. We ought to do lunch, as they say.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
So what did you think of Bob? He's really one of my favorite people in all of psychiatry. We'll put a link to his TED Talk in our show notes so you can check it out. All right, so we thought it would be interesting to find out if the average person thinks about being happy on a regular basis. Our wonderful producer, Sarah Gerton, went to the Green in New Haven, Connecticut on a recent afternoon to get some opinions. Can't you just see her out there on the Green in New Haven? Sarah with her red hair going and looking for people's thoughts about happiness. Nice work if you can get it. Here's what she found.
Do you think happiness is important in life?
Yeah, I think happiness is important.
How do you stay happy?
You do things that make you happy, and you surround yourself with people that makes you happy and have good influence on you. I hang out with my friends, and I do things I love, and I don't know, eat a lot of good food.
What do you think is the key to living a good life?
Do what you really want or what you love. Like, people go to work and they sit in cubicles all day, and then they come home and they're miserable. That's not life. That's just making money, and that's it. That's not a life to live.
Do you think about being happy?
Every day.
You do?
Of course.
And what do you think is the key to living a good life?
A good balance. Everything in moderation.
I've come to, over the years, to realize that I'm responsible for my own happiness. It's not fair to any other individual to make them responsible for making me happy. Amen? So, go ahead.
Is it something you think about every day?
No, I'm a Christian, born-again Christian, a minister of the gospel, and God is love. Amen? So He's filled me with His love, but now my happiness depends on what I do to maintain happiness. Now, is life a perfect picture? No. Life is an arduous journey. Amen? But with Him, I can maintain happiness as long as I stay within the realm of what He's provided.
I'm happy when I paint.
Do you think happiness is the most important thing in life?
More important than money, yeah. I guess.
So what do you think is the key to a good life?
Relationships and self-love.
So what do you think is the key to living a good life?
Self-love, self-respect, self-discipline with oneself, you mean, and the love that you got for yourself and others. That's pure happiness for me.
How important is happiness to you?
I mean, I think it's important to be in touch with all of your emotions, but like definitely like self-love and feeling good about yourself is probably most important. For me, at least, when I'm not feeling great about myself, my life is kind of not so great. But when I'm feeling comfortable and like happy with who I am, then everything seems to go a lot better.
I don't know about you, but I loved listening to that montage, and thank you so much, Sarah, for going out onto the green. I loved those comments. I particularly like the man who said life is an arduous journey. I think as we get talking about happiness, we sometimes forget that life is hard. Life is difficult. Life is full of loss and pain, and that, as another one of the commentators said, it's all about balance and remembering when you're going through a hard patch that good patches will come. And the key to it all is the theme that ran through just about everyone's comment is love. Love what you're doing. Love the people you're with. A lot of people mention self-love. That can be a little bit dangerous because I know an awful lot of people who love themselves who probably shouldn't. But but at the same time, it's good to have a healthy sense of self-esteem. And I think most of what's ever been written, from the wisest people in classical antiquity to today, would say that at the very center of the secret to a wonderful life is loving connections. That's certainly what Bob Waldinger's study has shown, and so many others. All right, so at the beginning of this show, I mentioned that happiness has become a big business in the United States. Leave it to us to turn it into a business. But it is. It's not the same in the rest of the world. When British writer Ruth Whippman moved to the United States, she was so struck by how often the subject of happiness came up that she wrote a whole book about it. Ruth joins us now. I'm so pleased to have her to talk about her work, America the Anxious, How Our Pursuit of Happiness is Creating a Nation of Nervous Wrecks. Great title. So paradoxical. Can you give us the background of this and tell us how you got interested in this topic?
Yeah, well, I moved to the U.S. I'm from the U.K., as you can probably tell from my accent. And we moved to California about 5 years ago. And I started to notice, pretty quickly that this strange thing was happening as soon as we moved here, which was that I seemed to be having the same conversation with people over and over again. And people seem to be very, very obsessed with this topic of happiness, how to find happiness, how to make themselves happier, the different things that they were doing that were kind of to work on that big project of making themselves happier, whether that was self-help books or positive thinking or positive psychology or meditation, mindfulness, all of these big things seem to be a real kind of cultural preoccupation. So I was interested to find out more, and when I started looking into the statistics, despite spending more time and money and effort on finding happiness than anywhere else in the world, actually, when you look at the actual figures, Americans are some of the least happy and most anxious people in the developed world. And my book was kind of a journey to find, to really understand why and what was going wrong.
That's so interesting. So it's in our Declaration of Independence, the pursuit of happiness. It's certainly part of our DNA, but we pursue it, but we don't find it, huh?
Right, and I wanted to find out kind of which way this was going. Was it that people were looking so hard for happiness because they were already so unhappy that they just desperately needed to find it? Or was there something about the actual pursuit of happiness itself that was adding to this stress or, maybe even causing some of this stress and anxiety?
Mm-hmm. Do you think we set an unrealistic bar too high that makes it impossible?
Yes, I think that's definitely part of the issue. That I think people, as you say, in the US set this incredibly high bar for how happy people, how happy we should be or how happy we feel entitled to be. But it's this kind of star-spangled happiness, this like incredible riches, incredible bliss, incredible wonderful thing. And I think it's really unattainable. And I think now with social media as well, that really contributes to upping the stakes even more.
I was a English major in college, and I wrote my undergraduate thesis on Samuel Johnson, one of your great geniuses, and he He said life is everywhere a state in which there is little to be enjoyed and much to be endured. And,
very British.
And he said we live in a world that is bursting with sin and sorrow. And I think we Americans we just don't like to hear those kinds of statements. We seem to have it. We sort of have this command: be happy, be upbeat, be positive.
Be positive. And I think, we sort of place, in the US, people place a very high premium on positivity, thinking positive, looking positive, acting positive. And, I think in many ways it's a lovely trait. I think there's something about making the best of a situation, putting a smile on, that can actually be a very, a very nice thing, a good thing to encounter. But at the same time, it's pretty stressful. Because I think when we don't acknowledge that negative emotions are a really big part of life, they're a necessary part of life. And actually, you can't be psychologically healthy without negative emotions, without acknowledging them. And I think if we try to brush them under the carpet, then really it can lead to extra problems.
Absolutely. I mean, Johnson was right. There is a lot of lousy stuff in life. I mean, it just...
Right. And rather than try and pretend it's not there, I think to acknowledge it and try and deal with it is a much more healthy way to go. I mean, there's some great research that I came across while researching my book. At UC Berkeley, they do a lot of studies into happiness. And they found, researchers said, that the more highly people value happiness and the more relentlessly they pursue happiness, the more likely they are to be unhappy, anxious, and even depressed than people who value it less highly.
From the description I got of your book, you went to some interesting places. There's a happiness city in the Nevada desert.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, that was fascinating. So there's a tech entrepreneur named Tony Hsieh. He runs an online shoe retailer called Zappos. He made an awful lot of money, and instead of buying a yacht or an island or whatever rich people do, he basically bought up the entirety of downtown Las Vegas. So he bought the buildings, the businesses, the land, all of it, and started to try to run it as this kind of utopia in a way, a kind of happiness utopia. He is very, very influenced by the principles of positive psychology, of the happiness movement. His company, Zappos, was really run along those lines. If you go there, it's full of balloon animals and parades and parties and all the rest of it. So he tried to run this city as a kind of happiness community in a way. He brought entrepreneurs from all over the US. He funded their businesses. Many of them live in these kind of semi-communal living spaces where they live and work together. And, it's a very odd place. It has this very kind of high-pressure atmosphere when you go there. It's strange in a number of different ways. And, you can read more about it if anyone wants to read about it in the book, and my experience is there. But, I mean, one thing that started to happen in this community, this so-called happiness community, was that they started to have a spate of very tragic suicides within this community. And I think part of that, lots of the locals were saying that this was in part due to this high-pressure happiness atmosphere. Because people felt this onerous burden of having to be happy every single minute of the day. Yeah, happy and positive and upbeat and hanging out and, living kind of in public, living your emotions in public. And I think that pressure alone, was a lot for people to handle. Yeah. I often say, when you connect with other people, what you want to be is genuine. And you can stick your head into someone's office and say, life sucks. And the person can say, yeah, life sucks. And you both feel better. Right, and you form a connection that way, absolutely. And I think there's a slight tendency, at its worst, the positive thinking movement, I think, can be quite dismissive of people's feelings. Someone says, I'm having a terrible day, everything's going wrong, somebody was horrible to me, someone's died, whatever, and someone says, well, just think positive. It's kind of a way of not engaging with people's actual problems. Totally. I mean, you completely invalidate the other person's experience. Right, and it's almost as if you're blaming them for their own mental state. It's like saying it's not the actual circumstances, it's just you. Right, stop being such a crybaby. Right. Well, you said you went to another place where some controversial self-help course that you learned that all your problems are your fault. Yeah, so I did the Landmark Forum, which is a very influential self-help. I mean, they probably wouldn't characterize it as a self-help thing exactly, but it's that sort of thing. You go for a weekend-long course, 3 days. It's very long hours. You sit in a room. You're not supposed to get up or walk around, or you have very limited breaks. And the overriding message is that your problems are your responsibility. I mean, they don't use the word fault, but responsibility is kind of a euphemism for fault. I found it quite worrying and quite upsetting.
People do flock to this kind of stuff. I mean, Tony Robbins is not exactly the same, but it's he's also trying to inspire people and, whip them into a frenzy, and people swear by him.
Yeah, and it's a huge industry in this country. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Is it really? Tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, the self-help industry, as you would traditionally think of it, the apps, the coaching courses, all the rest of it, that is approximately $11 billion industry in the U.S. So to put that in context, about the same size as Hollywood. As I came to think of it, the other great purveyors of this happy ever after message. Yeah. But, and they're selling happiness as a consumer product. They're saying, if you just do this thing, go on this course, read this book, try this app, then you will be happy. You'll have this blissful happiness. And the promises they make are huge. Uh-huh. And, the quality varies between these different things. But, there is money to be made in this happiness.
You can't get your money back if you don't become happy.
No, you definitely don't get your money back, and it's expensive, And for me, you're spending $550 or whatever it is on, I think probably more by now, on a weekend course. Actually, maybe it would be better to spend that money on, going away with your family, or connecting with other people, or doing something that actually contributes to your life, or learning something else,
Absolutely. Did you ever come across Gretchen Rubin, her books?
Yeah. So Gretchen Rubin's book, The Happiness Project, I actually really enjoyed, as these self-help books go, and it was a tremendous success. I like her writing. Mm-hmm. I think she does a good job of making it accessible. I think the good thing about Gretchen Rubin's book is that she's not saying this one thing is the answer for everybody. Mm-hmm. If you just try my 3 simple strategies, then you too can be as happy. I think her book is more about her own personal journey to find out what worked for her. Mm-hmm. And she's very upfront about saying that, what works for me might not work for somebody else, and that we're all different. And she sort of acknowledges that there's complexity. And she says, you're better off learning from someone's very specific experience rather than trying to find general things that apply.
And what worked for her?
I mean, she had a bunch of things. I mean, for her, she's obviously a very specific type of personality, which is different to mine. I mean, there was a lot of cleaning in there. There seemed to be a lot of decluttering the closet and that sort of thing, which, great. If that works for you, then whatever. There was a smaller section, I think, on social connection and making friends, which is something that I found absolutely in my research. I mean, if there was one thing that you could pull out that absolutely dwarfs everything else in terms of what genuinely contributes to our happiness, it's that. It's our relationships with other people and our social networks and social support. So she wrote about that.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that's the cornerstone of all my books. I think I call it the other vitamin C, Vitamin Connect.
And
we're living in a massive vitamin connect deficiency, but it's so paradoxical because we're so connected electronically, but we're disconnecting interpersonally.
Personally and emotionally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the real heart of the problem. And I think the so-called happiness industry is almost pushing us in the complete opposite direction.
Yes.
I mean, considering the strength of evidence for how important connecting with other people and socializing and social support is for everybody, irrespective of class, gender, race, whatever, you would think that anyone in the happiness business would just be saying, throw away my book and just do this one thing.
Right.
This is what you need to do. And, but actually, all the trends in self-help and, the happiness industry seem to be to do with spending more time alone, more time focusing on yourself, more time going deep within yourself. Especially, some of the newer things like the mindfulness movement, meditation. I mean, not to denigrate those things specifically, but, they're very much about being on your own
Self.
and focusing on yourself and your inner life rather than connecting with other people.
Yeah, you're so right. I often say, how do I give you the good news that if you would just take connection more seriously, happiness would follow. But not only happy. See, I think it's deeper than that. I think fulfillment, and part of fulfillment, as you point out, is acknowledging sadness, acknowledging tragedy, acknowledging that terrible things really do happen.
Yes, and that, we all have our place in the world and we're all part of it together. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, and that it's, if you're feeling down, the best thing to do is to, one of my favorite lines is never worry alone.
Right.
It's fine to worry, just don't worry alone.
Yeah, I mean, other people give us perspective, they give us support, they give us kindness, and you have to put it out there as well. You have to contribute all these things to other people as well.
Yeah.
It's the sort of, you talk about the self-help movement. I mean, the clue there is the word self.
Exactly.
Really, we should be looking outside ourselves.
Whatever happened to in giving we receive, it's... well, I think your book is a very important book, America the Anxious. And it seems that your message is, revise your expectations and treasure your friends, and it's okay to be unhappy.
Yes, and connect more.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, that instead of torturing yourself with ridiculously elevated expelations and then blaming yourself when you don't achieve them.
Right, yeah.
And then hiring someone to yell at you.
To yell at you to make you feel even worse. That's so true.
Well, I just, what a joy to talk to you. And
you too.
You're obviously
a pleasure.
Brilliant and creative woman, and America the Anxious.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you
It's
so
been
much.
great to talk to you. I've really enjoyed it.
All right, take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
My thanks, my heartfelt thanks, my happy thanks to Ruth Whippman for joining us on Distraction. She's a very smart lady. We'll put a link to her book in the show notes. Well, that's our show for today. I have to tell you, this show has been a special joy for me because I've had a chance to connect to some people that I admire a lot. Bob Waldinger's study, which is the descendant of George Vaillant's study, the Grant study, I particularly care about, respect, and admire. And it really proves, what I've made the cornerstone of my work, that living a connected life, loving connections is the key. And the people that Sarah, our producer, went out to and found on the green in New Haven, sharing their thoughts, it was the same theme. And Ruth Whippman pointed out that it can be a real trap if you set happiness as being your daily goal, because, after all, life really must include the opposite of happiness at times, and that's okay. Don't think you're failing life if you have a bad day. If you have often when I drive down here to do this podcast, I get stuck in traffic, and I don't like that. I'm unhappy stuck in traffic, I have to confess. It makes me very unhappy. And so if I had as my goal to be constantly happy, I would be failing. And keep that in mind, that it is a matter of ups and downs and balance. But yes, passionate connection is, I think, the key to it all. Well, thank you so much for listening, and please do reach out to us. We love your comments. Please reach out to us with your comments and ideas for future shows. Send us an email to connect@distractionpodcast.com. This is Ned Hallowell. Thanks so much. Distraction is produced by Collisions, the podcast division of CRN International. Collisions, podcasts for curious people. Our audio engineer is the incredibly talented Scott Person. Our producer is the beautiful and also incredibly talented Sarah Gurton. And our music theme was created by the very talented Mark Berman.